The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. My name is Adrian Benjamins and I'm joined by Neil Rochlani. Neil, how are you?
Doing all right, Adrian. How are you? Two days in a row.
2 days. Yeah, 2 days in a row. We were not supposed to be here today, but Dan had a personal issue he had to take care of. So we're holding down the fort. We're filling in. And I'm excited to talk to you, Neil. I thought it'd be a lot of fun to kind of take a look at the winners and the losers of off-season free agency, kind of just look at what teams are trending up and which teams maybe are going the opposite way, trending down. And I thought we'd start at the Atlantic Division and just kind of go team by team and just talk about, did they have a good offseason? Did they have a good free agency? Or did they have a bad one? What do you think?
That sounds great. And I just want to say, for those of you expecting Dan Brasper, I'm sorry. We'll do our best to try to give a little bit of analysis. Unfortunately, nothing much happened in the NBA yesterday. The biggest news was Kevin Durant making fun of CJ McCollum, I guess. And there's really no fantasy fallout from that. So, yeah, I think this will be fun to go through sort of some teams in the Atlantic Division and see what we think about the changes in their roster composition going into this year and how that might affect them for fantasy and just, like you said, winners and losers and so forth.
You know, since you're mentioning news, there was a little tiny tidbit of news. I don't know how important it is, but I read that Jimmy Butler, that he underwent a successful surgery to his right hand, a procedure. It sounds like nothing serious at all. Reports saying that he'll be ready to go for training camp and that he's already like working out and doing workout type of activity. So it's not really much news. Now, if anything happens at training camp or preseason, like if he doesn't look right, then I think we'll come back to that and see if there's any cause for concern there.
Yeah, I did see that news as well, and hopefully it's nothing serious. I mean, I guess just pay attention to his shooting, but I think he'll be fine.
All right, Neil. So let's get into the Atlantic Division. Let's start with the Toronto Raptors, and I want to get your thoughts. Would you consider them winners or losers from this free agency off-season period? And, we'll kind of stick more towards a fantasy perspective. What are your thoughts on the Raptors? Would you call them winners or losers?
I'm going to call them big winners. They got the best player who was not named LeBron in the free agency market. And Kawhi, I'm assuming, is going to go out there and give it his all. He's going to want to get that max contract after the season, whether that's in Toronto or Los Angeles or wherever else he might end up. So DeMar DeRozan leaving along with Jakob Poeltl, who I think will be a decent player going forward. Poeltl, that is. But sticking with Toronto, and then Danny Green coming too, but we learned Danny Green had an injury last year, and who knows his status for this year. So when I say winners, I say what that means to me from a fantasy perspective is this team more predictable? Are the fantasy stats more predictable? And I think with this change, they are, assuming Kawhi comes in healthy and he's looking like the Kawhi who wasn't out all last year. So what is your take on this team?
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like the Raptors are definitely winners from the offseason free agency period. Them getting Kawhi puts them on another level. And for fantasy purposes, definitely, they seem very similar to last season. They did also add Danny Green, who I think will be a little interesting to see how he fits in with this team. The other really interesting thing, too, is they got rid of Coach Casey, and they have a new coach. And I like that move because, Neil, Coach Casey at times was a little frustrating for fantasy. I feel like there were times where he wasn't playing Jonas Valanciunas when he should, or certain guys weren't getting the proper minutes. So I'm really hoping that the coach change kind of makes them a better fantasy team. And I'm really interesting to see how Kawhi Leonard fits in with this team and how he looks for fantasy. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the change in coaching, which I did not think about right at the top of my head. I was looking at their pace last year, and they were right in the middle, around 14th. And so I wonder how the new regime is going to change the pace of play. I do agree with you. Last year, a lot of times Casey would keep the second unit in a lot longer in the second half, sometimes even closing out the game. So guys that were starters did not get the minutes that you might have been expecting, and that was sort of an anomaly. I don't know if that was just confidence he had in that unit last year or what exactly why that occurred, but I don't think that's going to happen again this year. So I think there's more confidence in guys like Lowry, if Danny Green's starting, and Valanciunas getting more of their sort of predicted share of minutes.
Yeah, and real quick, there's some guys on this team that I want to watch as soon as the season starts. Pascal Siakam, OJ Anunoby, DeLon Wright. They got a lot of guys here. I'm kind of curious to see if one of these guys can kind of step up and get some late round value. And just really interesting to see how different the rotation is. And then just, how different it is having a guy like Kawhi Leonard there. So, yeah, really interesting with the Raptors. All right, Neil, let's go on to the next team. Next team I got up is the Boston Celtics. Would you consider them winners or losers from the offseason free agency period?
Well, really no change, right? Am I missing something that big happened to them? Smart is back. Irving, Smart was the only signing, right, that they really made that was sort of up in the air in terms of his re-signing with the team. Everyone else seems to be pretty much on par. What I'm worried about with this team going forward is there's two things. Brad Stevens doesn't really plays players a lot of minutes, so that's going to go. That's never really a good thing for fantasy. And then secondly, Gordon Hayward, I'm assuming is going to come back fully healthy and eat up a lot of usage into Tatum's and also Brown's and everyone else. So that's going to be really hard to predict for me. Where does Hayward fit in terms of his fantasy value along with the other guys there? And then Rozier backing up Irving. Rozier really looked really good last year, and I imagine he's going to have a decent role as a backup player. So I don't know if Kyrie's going to be as high as he was going into last year. There's a lot of question marks here. So I would only call them losers because not from obviously from how I think they're going to do. I think they're a better team than last year, but in terms of being able to predict their fantasy stats, this one's going to be harder for me. What are your thoughts on the Celtics?
I feel the same way. I almost, and it feels weird calling them losers because they're now adding, okay, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and they're now adding Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward, and it feels weird calling them losers. But from a fantasy perspective, I almost feel like they are because, we got an amazing season out of Jason Tatum. Al Horford's a solid player. And Jaylen Brown, put up some late value. And I feel like we have no idea what to expect when you throw in a healthy Kyrie Irving, a healthy Gordon Hayward. There's just so many mouths to feed. We don't know what the minutes are going to look like. The backcourt, you have to feel like Kyrie Irving is pretty safe. But him coming off of that injury, the emergence of Terry Rozier, them re-signing and keeping Marcus Smart, you don't really know. And so that whole feeling of uncertainty for me, I'm really shying away from Boston. I feel like Al Horford's pretty safe. He's the main man in that front court. I think he's a pretty safe bet. I have no problem drafting him. But everybody else, I loved Jason Tatum last season. I can't touch Jason Tatum because is Gordon Hayward going to take a lot of usage away from him? Neil, we just don't know. From a reality standpoint, though, big winners, man. This team's you have to for sure see them again in the Eastern Conference. they're actually my pick to go to the finals from the Eastern side. So from a reality standpoint, big winners. From a fantasy standpoint, just because of the uncertainty, I call them losers. Do you agree?
Yeah, exactly. I think you made a good point about how does Jason Tatum, a guy who came into the league and just totally took over, kind of like the forgotten rookie of the year, right? He wasn't even in the conversation. He was so great last year. And I think his minutes may come down. His usage is going to come down with Gordon back in there. So that's going to be tough. And then also Marcus Smart, who I know Brad Stevens loves him, and he does such great things on the court. Unfortunately, because of his percentages, it doesn't translate very well to fantasy. But that means he's going to cut into Brown and maybe Kyrie as well. So um, I may be staying away from some Celtics players this year. We'll see.
Yeah,
That's what I got.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really not targeting anyone. I do think though, if Kyrie Irving's healthy, I think he's fine to target and to own just because he's so ball dominant and he's the main man on that team. So I do feel like if Kyrie's healthy, he'll be fine. But until I see him, I'm just gonna, I don't know, man. Like everyone on this team, I'm just kind of shying away from. But anyways, Neil, let's move on to the next team. Next team I got up is the Philadelphia 76ers. Would you call them winners or losers?
I'm trusting the process. I think they're going to be great again next year. I like the addition of Wilson Chandler. Um, I don't think did they lose anyone that I'm forgetting from last year?
They
They added Muscala as a backup,
they added
the power forward, and
Muscala.
they added Chandler, which I think are really good additions
Hmm.
for their help. Oh, they lost was it Ersan Ilyasova? But he might have been gone earlier. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, so I'm going to call them winners. I think Fultz is going to. He's got his time off. Hopefully, comes back and looks really good. From what I've heard in some of the chatter, that he is um, going to be ready to go at the beginning of the season and is ready to show why they took him number one. So we'll see how good he can play at that level. I am really looking forward to this team. And I think their pace, I'm trying to look at last year's. Hold on one second. I think it was fourth last year. So I love this team in terms of pace. Um, their minutes, I guess having Fultz in there, if he's going to be playing around 30 minutes, is going to make things a little more harder to predict. But other than that, I think this team has a lot of good fantasy value.
Yeah, I agree. You know what? I'd call them winners as well, and I like that they kept their core together, bringing back guys like JJ Redick and Covington, Dario Saric. I think we can kind of predict what's going on here. So I like you hearing a lot of positive things about Markelle Fultz. Supposedly his shot looks fine. He's looking a lot better. So if we see an improved and the Markelle Fultz that we expected on top of what we saw last season, that can be really, really good. Markelle Fultz, interesting late round pick. I think you'll probably be able to get him pretty late. Really curious to see if he can break out this year. Your two main guys, of course, that you're targeting and you want on this team is Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Would really love to see Ben Simmons make a leap this year. He looked so good last season, and Joel Embiid as well. So, I call them for sure big winners. Out on the wing, though, they do feel a little bit crowded, Neil. As you mentioned, they did add Wilson Chandler. They did add Mike Muscala, who's more of a front court. They drafted a nice wing player as well in Zaire Smith. So I'm going to be fading Robert Covington this year because just a little curious to see, with their depth on the wing, if that's going to hurt him. And with the emergence of Markelle Fultz, will that also help hurt Robert Covington as well? So fading Covington a little bit. All right, Neil, do you got any closing thoughts on the Sixers?
Yeah, I agree with that. Covington, though, I think if he gets enough bad publicity and he does kind of fall in the rankings because of what you said, I'm definitely a big Covington fan. So I'm not too concerned. Last year he played 31.6 minutes. his usage may get cut into, like you said, but I don't know if his minutes will go down that much. So if he's still, there in like the mid to late rounds, I would definitely target him. JJ Redick, on the other hand, I will avoid. Doesn't do much outside the 3 points and the shooting, free throw percentage. I just I think he obviously is past his prime, and I don't think he's gonna put up much fantasy value this coming season. So Darius Arch is the more wild card. Had a great postseason, had a very solid regular season. Just under 30 minutes. I don't know what the Muscala backup is going to do for him, if anything at all. So that one I'm going to try to gather some intelligence before the season starts and before I kind of put him in my rankings.
All right, let's move on to the next team. Let's talk about the New York Knicks. Neil, would you consider them winners or losers from this free agency offseason?
Well, they got Super Mario, so doesn't that mean they're winners? Are you with me on that?
No, I'm with you, man. I really like Mario Hezonja this season. You can get him. I think you'll be able to get him really late. The way that their depth chart looks right now, I would consider him their starting small forward. I also consider them winners because they drafted a nice player in Kevin Knox. Still a little raw, but looked really good in Summer League. And I'm really curious, with Porzingis not being ready at the start of the season, I think Kevin Knox, he can get some minutes, and I'm really curious to see if he can carve out some fantasy value right away for this team. The other reason why I consider them a winner, Neil, I don't know if you've seen any of this Mitchell Robinson, the center that they drafted in the second round. This guy fell. He looked amazing in Summer League, blocked a ton of shots. I believe he set the record for blocks in Summer League, averaging 4 a game. So this guy looks really good. I think they originally drafted this guy thinking he would be like a G League player for a while, but I think they're like ready to put him in the rotation. I think he could be the backup big right away. I also really like Enes Kanter. Curious to see what Tim Hardaway Jr. can do. He was real up and down, but I still kind of believe in his talent. The other thing as well, Frank Ntilikina, hearing really nice things about him in the offseason. I'm really hoping he can make the jump, the leap, improve this year. What are your thoughts, Neil?
Yeah, this one's tough for me to say in terms of winners and losers because this one is going to be hard to predict for me. I like Kanter a lot coming this year, but you talked about Robinson, and I don't know if they're going to go in that direction and give Robinson a fair amount of minutes or not now. And then Kevin Knox on the wing as well. Courtney Lee stepped up last year and was a pretty good fantasy player for someone who was undrafted and did a decent job. So I'm worried about him now with Knox there and Hardaway Jr. coming back after having sort of an up and down season last year with health. And then the backcourt is just really confusing. Is Moutier their point guard? Is it Trey Burke? Is Ntilikina their point guard? I don't know what's going on back there. I don't think it's Ron Baker. So I'm really confused about the Knicks. So from a fantasy perspective, this is kind of a loser just because I don't even know how to project Hezonja because he showed flashes, but can he do it for a long period of time consistently? He's had some injury issues himself. So this one's really confusing to me.
So I'm
going to defer to you on your projections for this team this year because I don't know what to do.
So I think Enes Kanter will be solid. I don't really see Mitchell Robinson taking minutes away from him. Mitchell Robinson should be the backup big here. I think Enes Kanter is primed for a great season, especially with Kristaps Porzingis likely not being ready for the beginning of the season. I really love Mario Hezonja. As soon as they signed him, I thought, man, what a perfect landing spot. The Knicks really lacking talent on the wing other than, as you mentioned, Courtney Lee did look good last year, but I'm not banking on him for this season. I would draft Tim Hardaway Jr. in the later rounds. And I really hope Frank Ntilikina is the guy that emerges in that backcourt. We know who Emmanuel Mudiay is. Very inefficient, not a great player. Same with Trey Burke. Ntilikina is the one with the huge upside, the raw talent. So I really hope he makes that step this year. And I think the Knicks are going to give him every opportunity. He's the guy I would target in that backcourt. Likely you can get him very late. So I like this team for fantasy. And Mario Hezonja, I likely will have him on a lot of my teams. Neil, I labeled this guy a bust a couple seasons ago. I thought he was done. And last year, I ate crow because the Magic had all those injuries. He got the minutes out on the wing, and he performed great. He showed that he can really be a good, reliable player. And I was wrong about Mario Hezonja, and I'm likely going to own him in a lot of leagues this year. All right, Neil, any last closing thoughts on the Knicks?
Yeah, I'm really hesitant about him, Hezonja. I feel like he's gonna be one of these players that people think is gonna jump off, and I don't know. I'm just so concerned about him. And then Ntilikina, he had a lot of the organization really wanted him to succeed last year, and he didn't seem to be able to do it. So maybe he had a great offseason and he's willing to come into preseason and hit his potential a little more. So those two guys I'll keep an eye on, but I'm still skeptical. Anyway, you ready to move on across New York City to the Brooklyn? Is that our last team?
Yep, one last team, the Brooklyn Nets. And we already kind of talked about this team. I think yesterday you and I were talking about this team. But anyways, from a team perspective, a fantasy perspective, Neil, would you consider them winners or losers from the offseason?
Yeah, I would say winners. I mean, I like the fact they shed some of their players, so there's a little more predictability. No one last year on their team played 30 minutes. I'm assuming that's going to change a little bit. I think guys like the backcourt players, Russell or Dinwiddie might hit that. Whoever's really going to take over that point guard spot, and then maybe Joe Harris. If he's sort of one of their key wings, I think could get up to 30 minutes. So they paid him in the offseason. They seem to want him there. Jared Allen is another one, has potential, and Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, when he's getting a lot of minutes, puts up really good fantasy numbers. So I really like this team for next year from a fantasy perspective. I just don't know. The backcourt is the one issue that I'm really confused about between Russell and Dinwiddie. What are your thoughts on Brooklyn?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to call them winners. I really like this team for fantasy. They got a lot of guys that can be really great fantasy players. D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie had a great season last year. Allen Crabbe, Karis LeVert, Rondae Hollis-Jefferson. Jared Allen I'm going to have on all my teams. I'm really hoping I'm able to draft Jared Allen everywhere. We've talked about it so many times, Neil. We love the pace that this team runs for fantasy. One of the best teams for pace. They are a little crowded. So that backcourt does have a lot of depth, but I think I'm really hoping that we get some clarity in the preseason on what this rotation looks like. I think D'Angelo Russell's going to be the guy. From Neil, I heard some really positive buzz about D'Angelo Russell, that he's working out hard, that Damari Carroll's been a really positive influence on him. He's been challenging him, and that D'Angelo Russell's put in a lot of time. So really hoping we see an improved D'Angelo Russell, because this is a guy that I drafted highly last season, and he kind of let me down. Just very inefficient, high turnovers. I'm really hoping that he makes a leap this year, because I do feel like he's got the talent, he's got the skill, and I'm just really hoping that, having another year of experience, he'll show vast improvement. So I do like D'Angelo Russell. Real quick too, big Karis LeVert fan. I really hope he gets good minutes, because this is a do-it-all type guy. The defensive stats can put up good scoring numbers as well. So Karis LeVert, real sneaky late round guy. Allen Crabbe as well, good scorer, was a little up and down. So a lot of options here, Neil.
Yeah, the wings a little crowd, like you said, between Crab, Levert, Carroll, and Harris. I am really hoping Harris emerges as one of their top wing guys. I really like him and his stat set. Front court wise, though, I think looks a little more predictable. I think Allen and Hollis Jefferson will get plenty of run, and they're both sort of like low key names who can put up decent fantasy stats or better than decent fantasy stats. So, very curious to see where they get ranked and where they get drafted.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Neil. Hollis Jefferson, really like another one of those do-it-all type guys. Love the defensive stats, the steals. And I agree with you, man. This front court, a lot more clarity in this front court. Jared Allen's the guy. Rondé Hollis Jefferson. They did add Ed Davis, but I just see Ed Davis as the backup guy. They did also add Kenneth Faried, although what I'm hearing is Faried likely might not even be on the team later during the season. So I don't think he's the guy. And then also, I don't think we need to worry about Jared Dudley. And as you mentioned, Neil, Joe Harris, love that guy. I was actually kind of disappointed when he re-signed with Brooklyn because they're so crowded on the wing. I would have loved to have seen him go into a team that lacked talent on the wing so that he could really get the usage that he needs to be a really good fantasy asset. All right, Neil, I think we're done with Brooklyn. Any closing thoughts there?
No, this one's going to be really interesting. A team that's not very good, doesn't have big name players, and they do have like sort of a rotation you can trust. That there's a lot of fantasy value there. So we'll really be looking at and like you said, the pace is fantastic. So like this Brooklyn team for fantasy perspective, we can just get it right with the players. What are we up to next? Is this?
Well, we're done.
This is the end of the division, aren't we? We're on the coast now. Where do we go?
No, this is the end of the Atlantic Division. Let's maybe work our way west. I don't know if we're going to get through every team, but maybe on the next show we can move on to the next division. Real quick, I want to say I hope you guys all have a good weekend. Neil, do you got any big plans for the weekend?
Like I mentioned yesterday, just a quiet little lake house up in Wisconsin.
Oh,
I'll be thinking about you in that camper and your time down in Southern California.
I'll be in a camper down in the San Diego area hanging out. And hey, you guys, ESPN just opened up their mock drafts. So I already got in there. I did a mock draft already, got one down. And right off the bat, very interesting stuff. Emmanuel Mudiay is ranked in the top 50. They've got Jonathan Isaac ranked somewhere in the 300s. My very last pick, I think I took Brandon Knight, who's ranked in the 700s. So really strange stuff going on with the rankings, which is to be expected on day one of any website that opens up their mock drafts. I'm sure we'll see them straighten out their rankings. But anyways, you guys, get in there. Let's start practicing some mock drafts. What do you think, Neil? Do you want to jump in some mock drafts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got to get you and I are going to do a mock draft together, and we should try to send that out on Twitter and see if anyone else wants to join us. And we could all, sign up in the same format. Let me ask you this. How long does it take to do a mock draft? I haven't done them in so long.
Oh, it took me like 15 minutes. It was so quick. Now, because they just opened, there's not a lot of people in there. So I did a 12-team mock draft, and I think there were only 6 other people in there, meaning the other 6 teams were auto-drafting, which sucks. But, yeah, let's see if we can maybe every once in a while, let's you and I get a mock draft, and let's see if we can get all of the listeners to jump in there with us and fill out a mock draft. Like, I think if you tried to go in there right now because they literally just opened, there's not enough people in there. Like, as we get closer and closer to draft season, it's going to get more and more crowded in there. But as of right now, there's just not enough people in there. But anyways, fun stuff, man. Jump in there. Let's practice. Real interesting to see how they have guys ranked, Neil. I think you're going to get a kick out of where they have a lot of these guys ranked.
Yeah, I think I have the plans for my next couple hours.
I might jump in there with you, man. All right, you guys, thank you for joining us. Please hit Neil and I up on Twitter, @BallWithNeil. Send us your questions. I'm @Adrian Benjamins. Hit us up, you guys. We love to hear from you. We'd like to answer some more of your questions on the show. We hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks a lot, everyone.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.